This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so let me come online, and this is what we were discussing yesterday on what are auto scale rules, what is exactly auto scaling, and what are the different types of auto scaling that is available. So, sorry, we said that there is something known as manual scale, and there is something called as custom auto scale out there. In manual scale, there has to be someone like a DevOps engineer or an administrator who's constantly monitoring the application and has to scale it out. Whereas in auto scale, you scale it based on a metric, and not all the plans support auto scaling. Only a couple of plans, like starting from S1, will start supporting something known as auto scaling, and this will immensely reduce your cost with your application being up and running all the time. So this is what we were kind of talking about. So anything until here, guys? Anyone? Anything until here? Okay. So let me set the agenda for today. So what we are going to do today is that now we have been looking at app services, and we have an understanding on what an app service really is, or what an Azure Web App really is right now. So we said that Azure Web App is nothing but a pure IIS server or an application server, which is powered by a backend app service plan. So let me name this as web app, and let me call this as a backend app service plan out here. And we are we are assuming that this backend app service plan is nothing but the virtual machine which gives it the RAM, the CPU, the drive, the RAM. I mean the hard drive and hardware and etc. So let's say app service plan. So you are now an organization, or you are now working with an organization. Let's imagine this use case scenario, wherein let's say you have some data. Like for example, you are working for an institute, or you're working for a university which gives out different courses. So all I want my website is to display what is the name of the course, what is the course ID, and let's say the rating of the course. So I have, let's say I have multiple courses out here, and I want to store it. Please listen to me very carefully. I want to store all the data in a structured format. So can I go ahead, store all this data into a service called storage account? Yes, no, maybe. Anyone?
No, account is for unstructured data.
For unstructured data, that's great. Yes, then what can I use? Which service can I use for storing data that is structured in nature?
Database.
Database. Great. So database. This is where I'm coming to. So I have a set of data. This is what I have right now, which is relational in nature. So I have in the form of, I'm just taking a very simple data out here. So I have a serial number, I have a course ID, and I have the course rating, the course name and the course rating. So let's say course rating. So I have like, three different columns out here, and I want to inject multiple data. For example, I want to say on serial number one, the university is offering a course called AZ104, which is Azure Administrator Certification. And the rating of the course is something like, the general rating of the course is something like 4.5 out of 5. And they are offering multiple courses like this, like AZ400, AZ900, and a lot of certifications that you can actually think of. Sorry. So all this data, excuse me for a second. Sorry about that. So all this data is now being stored into something called as a database, and you can have multiple databases that are available out there in the market. Like one of the most popular databases that is a product of Microsoft is an SQL database. We call it a SQL SQL, so whatever it is to which pleases your terminology. So we have SQL, we have Mongo, we have Cassandra, we have a lot of things out there in the market that are available. So I choose a database called a SQL database in order to store all this data. So I have all this data, so I just want to store all these things out here. So let me take this, and I want to store all these things. And whenever someone visits my website, this is the design what I want to follow right now, is that whenever someone, like a user who's coming here and he's trying to visit my website, this website should just go to the database, see what is the data inside this, and just return the entire data back again. So user is coming here, this is the workflow. User is hitting your website. This website is going to the app service plan. App service plan is going to the SQL database. SQL database is going into the data. It's understanding what is the data here, and it is returning to your app service. The app service is returning that particular data to the user. This is the workflow what we are right now trying to follow out here. So for establishing this kind of an architecture, I need a couple of things out here. Primarily, let's talk about two tiers out here. One called as a data tier. The other called as the application tier. This is how we start designing things out. Is that what are my data requirements, and all the data requirements is something I call as data tier, and all the application requirements is something that I call as application tier or the app tier. Now, or at a data level, at a data tier level, I need a SQL server. Let's say I would need something known as a SQL server out here. This is the first thing that I need. And under a SQL server, I would now start need to, or I will need something known as a SQL database, DB. These are the two components that I will actually need. Now, what exactly is a server? Is like you can imagine that a server is like the app service plan on the application tier. Now, can you create the app service without the app service plan? Yes, no, maybe.
No.
No, right? So, in the same way, you cannot create a database without a pre-existing SQL server. So, you cannot create a SQL database without a pre-existing SQL server. And under one app service plan, you can have multiple applications that are running, right? Because this is what is being charged right now. So you can have multiple applications that are running under one particular app service plan. In the same way, you can have multiple databases that are running under one particular SQL server. This is the relation between a SQL server and a database. So SQL server gives the databases all the power to run, meaning the processor, the memory, the space, and etc. And this is the unit which is called database, which actually holds your data. This is the workable unit which holds your data out here. So let's understand how do you create firstly, and let's also put down the application requirement out here. So on an application tier, I will just need an app service and I would need an app service plan. These are the two things that I will actually need. These are the only two things that I'm actually looking at. So this is the application tier and this is my data tier, and let's now start working on the data tier right now. So I firstly want to work on the backend and then I want to work on the front end. This is what I'm doing right now. So what I'll do here is like I'll firstly select a region called East US. So I'll just go and create a resource group there. and let's call this as web app SQL RG, like just a random name that I'm giving out here. Again, you can go ahead assign tags, or that's optional. Finally, I'll say review and create the resource group out here. So once the resource group is created, I'll go inside the resource group and I'll say create. And this time around, I'll go ahead and create something called as a SQL database. This is where it is. I'll go ahead and create something known as a SQL database out here. So what I'm going to do is I'll say I'll create, and I'll now start entering the name of a database. Let's say I want to enter the name of a database as, since we are creating this for the first time, I'll say first DB. Just giving a random name out here. And then it's asking me what is the name of the server. And it's telling me there is a server in Central US. Already there's a server in Central US. Do you want to use it? I will say no, I actually want it in East US. So I'll say create new. In your case, this will be a blank. It'll just say please create a new server, because without a server I cannot create a database out here. I'll say create, and I'll now start giving a name of a server. I'll say this is, since it is a SQL and a web app, so I'll say it's a web app SQL server 2ABC000, a unique name. So the name should be unique. The specified server name should also be available out here. And finally, I am saying, okay, fine, the location is East US. And since this is a server, it's now like a virtual machine, meaning if you need to look at data inside the server, you need some credentials for it, for which I'm just creating a credential. So I'm saying it is test user, and I'm saying the password is something like Microsoft -001. So I'm just writing the password and I'm confirming this out, and I'm saying okay. This is the only thing that I'm doing in the creation of a server, is that I selected what is a server, and I said okay fine, I want a server in East US and also the database in East US out here. And finally, it's telling you what exactly is the storage capacity that you need and what is the memory that you need to process this information, or how big of an application that you are actually trying to create out here. So I'll say configure the database, and I'll say there is something called DTU, data throughput unit, and it says it is 10 DTU. Now what exactly is DTU is like, you have something called ACUs when you're creating app service plan, which is called Azure Compute Units. And the very simple logic is that the more the number of ACUs are, the more faster your application is going to be, the more powerful your application is actually going to be. In the same way, this is a database application, and a database application meaning you will constantly be reading and writing the data from it, right? So how fast is the reading and writing capacity? This is decided by something known as DTUs, data throughput units, and this also makes sure to power your database. So in my case, I don't need so much of big I mean so much of big thing out here, because if you look at this, each and every DTU will cost you somewhere around 108 rupees. This is the price for one particular DTU, and it's now telling me that the estimated cost per month is somewhere around 1080, because I'm using 10 DTUs out here. So it is not based upon the storage, but rather it's based upon the DTU model in which Azure goes ahead and charges you. So I won't say that I need a standard performance, because I am just testing it out. So I'll go with something known as a basic workload, wherein I'm saying, okay, fine, I am good with 5 DTUs, this is the minimum number, and I'm good with about 2 GB of space. This is the database that I need. It's a very small database that I'm using. I'll say applying. So I said, okay, fine, it's a very small database that I need to use. I applied it out and I said, this is 2 GB, I'm good with this. And I am just saying that this database is locally redundant storage, meaning this is just has 3 copies. So you had the concept of LRS, GRS, and ZRS, right? So for this data also you can start implying that particular concept, LRS, GRS and everything. For now I'm just taking it as LRS and I'm saying okay fine networking. And for now, for this particular demo, the network connectivity, I will say it is a public endpoint. It should be accessible because I want to go ahead and access it out. And I'll say this is important. I'll say allow Azure services to access the resource. Meaning, at the end, I want my web app to access my SQL database, right? So that's the reason I will say yes. I want to allow the services of Azure to go ahead and access the data, and it's telling add the current client IP. Wherever you are working from, do you want to add your own IP here? I'll say yes because I want to go ahead and connect to this database. If I don't add it, let's see what happens. So if I'll say just say no, let's see what happens out here. And the connection policy is default and minimum TLS is TLS 1.2. This is something to do with the encryption and the security. So I'll say okay fine, I'm good with all these things. And security, I'm not doing anything. There is nothing that I'm doing out here. I'll say additional settings also I'm okay with it. I'm not doing anything, and I'll say review and create. The estimated cost is around 359 rupees per a month, meaning it's 10 rupees per a day. It's approximately 10 rupees per a day or 10.11 rupees per a day, you can say. So it's a very cheaper model because I'm using a basic model out here, wherein I'm just using a 2 GB memory out here. So I'll just go ahead and create this out. Now, one thing, guys, I just wanted to tell you all is that the database that I'm now creating is a managed server. The one that we are creating right now is a managed database, meaning this is a PaaS offering by Azure. This is called Azure SQL Server. It's not a SQL Server, it's an Azure SQL Server. Meaning, what exactly then is the difference between an Azure SQL Server and just a SQL Server out here? Is that earlier days, what we used to do is that we used to create virtual machines and we used to install a SQL Server image on top of this particular virtual machine. There used to be something called SQL Server image. We still have it, the same thing. I mean, we still have the same image out here. So we used to install something known as SQL Server image from the marketplace on this particular virtual machine, so that this virtual machine can now start acting as a database server. So when I say it's a database server, I'm not installing something called IIS on top of it. So it's not a web server, it will be a database server. And I'll be attaching something like a managed disk on top of this one. So if I have a managed disk out here, all the data will be stored inside this particular disk. So this is called the Azure SQL, or let's say SQL Server on a VM. On a VM. And this is an IaaS offering by Azure, wherein you have to go ahead, create this image, you have to manage, maintain this image, and etc. But the best option that Azure kind of gives you is the PaaS offering, wherein the platform or the provider configures all of these things out here, maintains the server, patches the server regularly, makes sure that the data is replicated and etc. In when I use, let's say, something like the virtual machine with let's say a managed disk and install a SQL Server image on top of it, then I as a user should manage all these things out. Meaning I have to make sure that the virtual machine is patched regularly, the virtual machine is taken care of, there are backups regularly, and all that stuff. So if I go into the virtual machine service also, and if I want to create a virtual machine, there's something called images of the virtual machine, right? So for example, there is something called image of the virtual machine. So I'll just say see all images. And if I just type in, let's say, something like SQL, There are multiple things out here called SQL servers and etc. So this is what I'm talking about. It's a SQL Server 2019 on Windows Server 2022. SQL Server 2019 on Windows Server 2019. What exactly do you want? You can select this particular image. It says this is, all these are the engines that I have. It's a free, it's a paid, and etc. So I can just select the free and etc. And this is how I can install the SQL Server on a virtual machine service. So instead, rather creating a very simple virtual machine, you can directly create a SQL virtual machine that runs a SQL Server on top of it. This is the infrastructure as a service offering by Azure. But right now we are interested into the platform as a service offering out here. And if you see, it got created, you have a database created. So let me go into the database. Let me go into the resource group firstly, and let me see what are all the resources that got provisioned. Okay, so it took the dev RC. Okay, great. So fine. So I'll just filter it out by location, and we need East US only. So I'm just filtering it out, whatever is there in East US. So in the East US, I have these are the two things that we created, and all of the other resources I was kind of working on the other day. So we have a SQL server. We have a SQL server out here. Type SQL server East US 2. We have a SQL database out here. So what I'm going to do out here is that I now want to start insert my data into the database. I want to understand how to insert the data into this one. So these are the options that you get on the SQL server itself. So on the SQL server, you have multiple options out here, one of which is something known as SQL databases, wherein the first DB, it's showing that the first DB is online, and you have multiple things like failover groups and also networking and etc. So what I'll do is I'll just go into the first database, and how do I connect to this database is that I have something called as query editor. So what I'll do is that I'll just click on this query editor out here, and I will say test user, and I'll start entering the password here. And it is now throwing me an error telling that cannot open web application request by login. Client IP is not allowed to access the server. Now that's the reason I wanted to whitelist my IP. Meaning I, as a user, I am not allowed to directly go ahead and log into the SQL server, because the SQL server doesn't allow you to log in until and unless you do something called as an IP whitelisting. This is the IP where I'm working from. This IP should be allowed to log into the SQL server. How do I do that? Again, I'll come back to the SQL server out here, and let's see firewall and virtual networks. And this is at the SQL server level, and it's now telling this is the client IP. I'll say this is my office IP. Just give the IP address out here. This can be any rule. You can give ABC XYZ anything, but to make it more meaningful, I'm just giving my office underscore IP out here. I'm saying save. So now I am updating the firewall rule of a server so that I, as a user, is able to go ahead and access the database. So I'll just go ahead again to the databases, and I'll go into the first DB, and I'll go into the query editor, and I'll say Microsoft -001, and here I am. So I am into the database right now, and this is how the view of the database actually looks like. Very importantly, we as DevOps engineers do not need to know a lot about SQL. We need to understand the infrastructure of a SQL. That is what we are suggested, or that's what we are required to do. You do not have to insert the data into the database. This is a work of a database administrator. That's a different role that you do have. But you need to just understand how the data is being inserted. How do you interact with the SQL server and etc. There are three things out here called tables, views, and stored procedures. Now I am just interested in something known as tables, because data in a SQL server or data in a SQL database is stored in the form of tables, and inside the tables you will have columns and rows. So all the data should be injected into a table. So you need a table out here. So how do you create a table? You cannot go ahead and directly create a table out here. Let's come back to the SQL Server. You cannot go ahead and directly say, you know what, please create a table for me. You cannot do that. You need to interact with the SQL database using a language called SQL. The language itself is called SQL, source query language. So you need to just understand, I mean, just have a very bare basic understanding of how SQL is really written and etc. And for this demo, I made sure to go ahead and create a public repository wherein I placed all the code that we use and everything that we use out here. So let me open that public repository out here. Let's see, where is that? It's this one. Now I'll tell you what this is. This is Azure DevOps really, and we are going to start Azure DevOps in a couple of days out here. So we'll go into what all this is or what all these are and extra. But for now, I have the SQL commands that I kept for you all, and this is all the repository or this is the link to everything. So if I go here, this is all the link to everything. So I'll just post it on the group chat out here so that someone can pick it up and post it on the WhatsApp group so that everyone can make utilization of this. So you have all these things. All you need to do is just go ahead and say download a zip. Okay, there are three buttons out here in the corner. Once you hit the link, just go say download a zip, and you'll get all these folder structures and all these things that are coming into your local machine. You can start using them. But for now, let me copy this out. Let me paste it in the notepad and let me expand the screen. And this is how SQL is actually going to look at, or this is how SQL is actually, we are actually going to interact with the SQL in this way. Meaning, what exactly is this? So I am telling that all the data should be placed in the form of tables and I mean in the form of tables, right? So I need to first create a table. So I'm saying I'll create a table called course. So the simple command for this is that I say create table space course. This is how you talk to SQL. This is the language of SQL. And I'm saying there are three things out here. One is called a course ID, meaning the ID of the course. One is called the course name. The second or the third is called the course rating. Meaning I'm just telling that there are three columns here called course ID, course name, and the rating. So I'm just telling them my table has all these three rows out here. So what I'll do here is I'll just copy this and I'll just go into my SQL Server into the query editor. I'll just paste it out here. Right now it says create table course. Course ID is an integer. Course name is called varchar variable character, meaning like a string in PowerShell that we use. Rating is a numeric. It can be something like a dot b, I mean 1.2 or something like that. So I'll just say run this query. Okay. It failed because I just selected something and ran. So I'll just say run this query entirely. And it says query succeeded, affected row 0. And I'll say results. And there is nothing in the result because I have not inserted anything. And if I just refresh the screen, and if I click on the table view, I have a table called dbo.course that got created for me. Now I want to see what is there inside it. So what I'll do is that I'll run a very simple query out here called select. So I'm saying select and I'm saying star, meaning select everything from a table called dbo.course. This is what I'm doing. So I'm saying select star, meaning select everything from this particular database or select everything from this particular table inside the database. And I'm saying run. And in the result, if you see right now, it just shows you three rows out here or three columns out here, sorry, called course ID, course name, and what rating. So this is just a bare a very blank table that I went ahead and created. There is no data inside it. So let me go ahead and drop some data here. How do I do that? Is again come back to my file, and these are the three commands that I'll now start using. So if I go back to the server, let me put this command here. This is how it looks like. So it says insert into course, meaning insert into the table called course, wherein the rows are course ID, wherein the columns are course ID, course name, and the rating. And the values for this are the course ID is 1. It can be anything. Let's say the course ID is 45. It is AZ, let's say 104 instead of 204. I'll say it is Azure Administrator. And the course rating is something like 4.5. And secondly, I'm saying another insert statement wherein I'm saying insert into course, where course ID, course name, and rating, and the values for this is something like, let's say 48. And let's say it is AZ303. So I don't really mind about what is the course basically that is getting displayed, since it's a very sample data. So I'll just say Control A and I'll just say run. Now it says query succeeded, affected rows are 3. And if I now want to see the data back again, I'll just go ahead and do a select star from dbo.cos, run this query. That's how it look like. All the data is being looked at like this. This is from the backend. So it's a database and it looks from the backend in this way, wherein you have a course ID, wherein you have a course name, wherein you have a rating, etc. And the reason that I call this as a relational database is because I can now query according to, let's say, the course ID or the course name or the course rating. For example, if I just do a select star from the database and I'll say space, I'll say where course ID is equal to 45. I only get this particular course which has the ID of 45, meaning I'm able to query inside my data. I'm able to look inside my data and I'm able to understand what my data really is. So these are just the very bare basics of the SQL. We do not have to go inside the SQL and understand what this is. But what we did so far is that we were able to insert all the data here and we were able to store all the data inside the database. Until now, any questions, guys? Are we good till now? Is everyone able to follow this? Any questions? Anyone, any questions? Anyone, anything,
హలో
any
సార్.
questions? Yeah,
హలో
please
సార్.
go ahead. Yeah, please go
ఇక్కడ
ahead.
క్వారీలో ఓపెన్ ప్లేస్ క్లోజ్ ప్లేస్ అని ఎలా యూజ్ చేస్తాం సార్ ఇక్కడ సెలెక్ట్ స్టార్ ఫ్రమ్
I'm sorry, I didn't get you. Can you please come again?
సెలెక్ట్ స్టార్ ఫ్రమ్ డిబిఓ డాట్
Mm-hmm.
కోర్సెస్.
Mm-hmm.
యాక్చువల్గా అయితే మామూలుగా సెలెక్ట్ స్టార్ ఫ్రమ్ కోర్స్ ఐడి కోర్స్ నేమ్ ఇచ్చుకుంటాం కదా సార్ ఎస్క్యూఎల్లో.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
ఇక్కడ ఓపెన్ ప్లేస్ క్లోజ్ ప్లేస్ అని ఇస్తాం సార్.
I'm
హలో,
sorry, I'm not able to follow your question. I'm not able to follow your question. Your voice is not that clear.
ఏబుల్ టు హలో.
Yeah, please go ahead.
హలో సార్, ఈజ్ ఏబుల్ టు
Better now. Can you please ask your question now?
సెలెక్ట్ స్టార్ ఫామ్ అని యాక్చువల్గా మనం ఇచ్చుకుంటాం సార్. సెలెక్ట్ స్టార్ ఫామ్
Mm-hmm.
డిబిఓ డాట్ కోర్స్ అని ఇచ్చాంగా.
Mm-hmm.
ఇక్కడ డిబిఓ ఓపెన్ ప్లేస్ అని క్లోజర్ ప్లేస్ అని ఇలా ఇచ్చుకోవాలా సార్ అక్కడ మనం?
Don't have to really, but it's just auto-filling for me. So when I said it is select star from,
ఓకే.
I did not give this. So I just said select star from, and I was just starting to type something like DBO. Automatically, it's
ఓకే.
filling this for me. So I just entered this. That's it.
ఓకే. థ్యాంక్ యూ సార్.
So not really,
Okay,
this is
thank
like not demanded. We can just enter this. I mean, we can, it's just auto filling it out. That's it. I can also
you.
say
Okay, okay.
select star from course. It'll still work.
Okay, okay. Okay, thank you.
It should still work. You'll get the same data even if I do this. Any more questions here, guys? And if you want to comment something in SQL, then it is two dashes out here to comment it out. So okay, so let's go forward. And this is what I have right now, is that I have a data tier that is ready. I need my application tier right now. So what I'll do is that I'll create the infrastructure for my application tier. I'll go into the app services. I'll say add an app service. And I will now start telling that the app service is in something called devdb or devrg. And I will say that the name of the app service is SQL app service to ABC 000, and I'll say the code is .NET Core. For now, I'll say that it is .NET Core right now. I will say it is EastUS2 or EastUS because I want my database and the application to be in the same region to avoid latency. I'll say this is plan SQL, just giving a name here. I'll say next. I'll say next monitoring. I'll say no. I'll say tags, review and create. So I am now creating the application tier right now. So I have the data tier. Now I have the application tier. I'm just creating. Now all that's left to do is a couple of things right now. Is that I have the code for this particular demo, which is called SQL app, and this is the solution file of the code. And if you look at the code, it's written in a language called .NET Core because I know what it is. That's the reason I'm telling. But I'll explain what is .NET Core and standard framework and everything. And this is what the code really looks like. And I have the SQL commands also. I have just placed the SQL commands and everything. So please make sure to just do or just download all of this as a zip so that you can start working with it. So once this is created, so this is now created right now. I have an app service, and if I browse here, I'm just getting this particular page out here. Okay. So what I'll do right now is that I already have this code in my local machine. So I'll just say Visual Studio. And this is the code that I have. So I just downloaded this code and I'll just click on the SQL app.sln file. In your case, once you download it, just go into the folder and double click this and open it using the Visual Studio 2019 or 2022, whatever it can be, not a problem. So I'm just opening the solution file directly. And this is open. Let's go ahead and try to do a demo here. Okay, so I am inside the code right now, and this is how it looks like. All I'm doing here is just doing a right click on the SQL app. This is the file that I'm doing a right click on. And as and when I do a right click, I'll just go ahead and publish it. That's the only thing that I'm doing right now. So I just downloaded all the code. I'm just going ahead and publishing it out here. And in my case, I'll already get a publishing profile. In your case, you will just get what is the target and everything. So let me load this out. Let me give it a second and let's go ahead and see what it looks like. So this is what I get, but in your case, you'll get something like this page, wherein it'll ask you where do you want to publish and everything. And I'll just select the publishing target as Azure, and I'll just select that the publishing target is an Azure web app running on Windows, because that's what I created. So I'll just say next, and it says okay fine, I'm just checking for resources out here, just give me a second, and it'll give you it'll give you a couple of resources out here. This is the application that we created, which is called SQL App Service to ABC 000, and I'll say finish. And finally, I'll just go into the configuration called release, and I will just say remove additional files from the destination. So I'm just making sure that my deployment is clean. So I'll say remove additional files at the destination, and I'll say save, and I'll hit on the publish button. So I've opened the code in Visual Studio. I'm just making sure to publish the code out. I'm not doing anything. So on the created application, I now want to use my local machine, and there is something known as Visual Studio on my local machine, wherein I have all the code. So I am just taking the code and I'm publishing it out from my local machine to the remote server that is running on Azure. So this is where I'm publishing all my code. So let's go back, and it's trying to build my project right now. The first thing that will happen is a build, and the second thing that will happen is a release. So this will take like about a minute or two. So let's give it a couple of minutes out here to go ahead and kind of deploy this application out. Until then, any questions till here, guys? Anyone, anything till here? Anyone, anything?
Kiran, can you explain the like simple concept of data tier? Like, just you said like these connections something, right?
I'm sorry,
Previously, data tier, like we have two tiers, like application tier as well as data tier.
data
Yeah,
tier is something. Data tier is something that I hold my data in. So, for example, if you are using a storage account, that becomes your data tier,
okay,
and I am using a SQL database right now. This becomes my data tier. So, whichever applications or whatever applications that you configure in order to store your data becomes the data tier, and whatever applications that you are giving out here in the front end is called an application tier. So, this web application and my app service plan will now become the application tier for me. This is the application tier. This is all what you see, and this becomes a data tier where you store all your data.
okay,
Okay.
okay.
So the data tier falls under IaaS services
Sorry, data tier.
that comes under IaaS services.
This data tier right now that we created now is an Azure SQL database. This is a managed service. It's a PaaS service. But if you go ahead create a virtual machine and install SQL Server image on it, that is going to become an IaaS service. So it depends where your database is actually running on. In my case, it's a PaaS, because if I go here, right, and if I go into my RG and I just filter it out by East US, let's filter it out by East US here. So these two, or rather these two, are Azure managed services. So it's a PaaS service for me right now. So the database tier for me is a PaaS service. If you install the same image on a virtual machine service, that would become an IaaS service. Does that answer your question, Shiva?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Anything else, guys? So I have deployed my code. It said the application got restarted successfully. So whatever we did yesterday, or whatever we did a couple of days ago, like just creating a sample code and deploying it, I'm just now taking a code that is created by someone. So since I'm not a developer, I did not write this code. So I just downloaded this code from a GitHub repository and just using it for my demos. And as and when I load or as and when I deploy this code out here, no matter how many times I refresh my application, this is the error that I get. The page isn't working, etc. And if I hit a F12 here, I am opening something called as a debug console. This is the error that I'm getting. That is that, you know what, I'm not able to get something. There's a 500 error and a lot of things are going on. Now, I have created the application tier. I have created the data tier. I deployed the code on the application tier. I did all these things. But have I connected my application tier to the data tier? Did I establish any sort of connections out here? Then how will the application tier, if I didn't do it, how will the application tier understand which server to look into and which database to look into? This is something that I didn't do yet, right? Agree with me, guys? Is everyone on the same page here? And that's the reason, no matter how many times I load, it's just throwing an internal server error telling that, you know what, I don't understand what you're requesting me because I don't have anything to actually show you. So what I'll do is I'll now finish the last piece of the puzzle by connecting these two things out here called application and the data tier. And how do I connect it? Is if I go into my SQL database, I have something called as connection strings. And this is how my connection string looks like for ADO.NET. It's a .NET application that I'm using. So this is how my connection string looks like for a .NET application. Let me copy and paste it out here. And it's telling me a lot of things out here, like the name of the server to begin with. Let me expand the screen, it's too tiny. So to begin with, the name of the server, and it says values something, and it says the name of the database is first DB, and it's telling the username, which is called test user. And for password, it is asking me to enter the password. So I'll just enter this password out here as Microsoft 001. This is what I'm entering. And it says multiple connections true and a lot of things out here. This thing got built. I'm not doing anything out here. I'm just copying this out. And copy it. Fine. I'll just build it again. So yes, this is my password. I'm giving a proper password, which is something that I've given while creating the database. Microsoft 001 out here given, and I'll just copy this out. I'll now go into my app service, and in the app service I have a section called as configuration. I'll go into the configuration, and if I just scroll down, there is something called connection strings, wherein I can mention what are all the connections that this application actually needs. And I'll say new connection string. Here I'll just paste the value of the entire connection string without any space, nothing. So if you look at this, this is the value, this is the entire connection string that I placed. So there is a space here, so I'll just remove everything. And the name of the connection string should be SQL connection. It has to be SQL connection. Reason being, the code is designed in such a way that it looks for something called a SQL connection out here. The code is designed in such, as such that it goes ahead and looks for something called a SQL connection. Now this, how do you know about this? This will be told you, or this will be told to you by a developer, that how the web application is trying to look for, what kind of a connection string it is trying to look for, and what is the name of the connection string. So it has to be this. So when you do a what do you say, a demo out here, or when you try to practice this out, please try to use the exact name called SQL Connections. And finally, I'll say it is SQL Azure. It is not a SQL Server. It's not a MySQL server. And I'll say save. So it says updating the web settings and everything. And finally, once it is saved, I'll just go ahead and restart my application server once. So I'll just restart. It should be fairly simple, and I'll say 1 2 3 4 5. Just wait for 5 seconds or 10 seconds, something like that. I'll just take my application link. I'm trying to open it out in an incognito window so that my browser cache doesn't affect the web page loading. So just try to load this and see what will happen here. And you are now getting all the data that was there inside the database, which is being projected on the front end application. This is what I actually wanted to do. And now the best part of it is that there is no user who has access to your database. It's only an application that has access to your database. So there is no actual user who basically goes here and looks into your database out here, but there are only applications which are trying to access your database, and these applications is something that you trust. So if I go ahead and add one more string out here, insert one more data into it, for example, let me do that. Let me say query editor. Let me go ahead and give my query here. And let me also take a SQL command to insert something. For example, let's say I insert this again. Let's load it up. Sometimes it might take some, this might have some issues. This is the inbuilt query editor. It's still in a preview mode, so it might have some issues out here. So let me go ahead and try to reload this again. And let me try to insert something inside the table. Again, I'm doing an insert into. Now I'll just change the course to something like AZ400, where I'll say it is not development, it's DevOps. Let's run this query. And if I run this query right now, and if I now say select star from,
Yeah.